and the skies opened up, and I was chosen as the shaman, to lead the people throughout space and time, from planet to planet. I was unsure at first how to perform my duties, but as time went on, I gained a familiarity with my spells, the destructive powers, the pain I could inflict on my enemies. My legacy will be recorded for all of eternity. My legacy. And they will call it the... So, next up on the list was Populous, and I decided to give it a go. And I got the treatment. What is the treatment, you might ask? Well, let me tell ya, it's 989 levels of Populous. That is a lot of game to get through. But hey, I'm getting ahead of myself, right? Let's get into what Populous actually is. Populous is a game where you play as a disembodied force that overlooks your people, a tribe, if you will. Your job is to guide them to victory by defeating the enemy tribe. You can do this through several means, but they can be grouped into 3 categories, which are just straight up battle, or you can use your spells, or you can use the raw elements of the nature around you to win. Combat in this game is very different from what we've come to expect from RTSs. You don't really control your characters directly in this game, and oftentimes combat, or rather victory, is not won necessarily through combat, but a combination of the elements and combat itself together. Now, what I'm about to explain to you took me a very long time to fully understand, so instead of pausing after each fact and saying, "This took me forever to figure out, rah 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 rah," I'm just going to lay it down now that this information did not come to me fast or easily, and during the time that I played not understanding it, I felt like I was trying to build a house with shorthand instructions written from a foreign country. But okay. So, you start off each level with these little guys called walkers. Now, walkers do not actually represent a single person in your tribe, but they represent a set number of people by not just one of those yellow bars up there on the top right, but 2 of them. The bars represent different tiers of health. These aren't the actual numbers, but you can think of it like this. The bar on the right is the 1s digit, and the bar on the left of the top right little shield thing that you can see there is like the 10s digit. Now it gets even deeper here because sometimes the yellow bars can turn a darker yellow, which means that the bar on the left has filled up completely and it has had to visually reset again from the bottom in order to accurately show the number of people that the walker represents, upon which it starts filling up again just like normal, and the right bar also functions as it was before, ticking down until it reaches 0 and taking 1 off the left. Why? Just why is this so complicated? Was a number too much to ask for? Was a single bar too much to ask for? Who designed this? There's actually more to this that we'll get to talk about later when we get to the environments, but for now, let that suffice. Anyway, are you lost yet? Well, good, because there's more! Combat in the game starts by growing your culture. Well, growing your population, or your populace, if you will. The more people you have, the bigger your army, right? Well, you want big houses for faster growth, because the bigger the house, the faster the people inside grow. And the more houses, the better, obviously. So basically you want to flatten the land around your walkers with your topography spells so that the ground is nice and even for them, because even a single walker, regardless of how many people they represent, can build one of the big houses. As long as they have the space to do it, the house will become big and they'll be able to produce people faster inside of it. But here's the catch. See, the bigger houses can hold more people, and people won't leave a house until it's been completely filled up. So if you have a bigger house, it's going to take a very long time for it to fill up and have people leave it to build more houses. So what you constantly have to do is eject people from the bigger houses using your topography spells to lift up or lower the ground briefly, causing the house to revert back to its smaller form, kicking out the extra people, and then immediately and quickly reshaping the ground so that it's fine again to turn it into a bigger house. This causes the kicked out people to then run around and look for a new place to build a house. It sounds silly, but this is the fastest way to grow your population. Okay, hopefully some of that made sense, and now that you understand that, we can get to the actual combat part. And if the previous explanation is any indication, yes, combat is just as wacky and obtuse as simply determining the health of your walkers. You see, your walkers will walk around, but unlike almost every RTS I've encountered, you don't control your people directly. In fact, they just do whatever they want. They walk wherever they want, they build whenever they want, they die stupidly to exposure because they won't take 3 steps down to where the flat ground is whenever they want. The only thing you can do is give your entire tribe suggestions, which come to settle, group up with each other and then settle, fight nearby enemies and then settle, and lastly, go to the holy symbol or the marker that is on the map. That last one will cause all walkers on the map to race each other to get to the marker first, and the first one who touches it will become the leader, and subsequently, any nearby walkers will join the leader, increasing the people count represented by the singular walker. At this point, the go-to marker suggestion actually becomes the follow the leader suggestion, as your walkers will now go to the leader's position and not the markers. As long as you have a leader, you can cast a spell to move the marker, assuming you have the mana to do so. This causes the leader to then go to the location of the marker. Do you see how complicated this is? The best way to understand it is to think of it like a chain. You place the marker, the leader goes to the marker, and your walkers follow the leader. Anyway, now walkers and leaders will naturally initiate combat with nearby enemies if they run into the same space, and they will prioritize running into the same space if you've told them to fight and then settle. However, there's no real way to tell them to mass invade the enemy aside from the Armageddon spell, which we'll get to later, which is why creating a leader is so helpful, because now with your leader set, you can move your marker into enemy territory, and the leaders and the walkers following behind him will move onto enemy grounds and likely initiate combat, especially if you put the marker on top of an enemy building. The problem is that this causes you to not be able to manage what's going on your side of the map, but you constantly have to be on the enemy side of the map, picking up the marker and putting it down, and picking up the marker and putting it down, and making sure your people aren't doing something stupid like drowning or dying in swamps or etc, etc. Now there is a solution sort of to this, but it's just another final step to the complicated madness. If you have access to the Knight spell and you have enough mana to cast it, you can actually turn your leader into a knight, and the knight will go around and attack on his own and burn down enemy buildings, and that sort of frees you up to be able to pay attention to other parts of the map. The downside is that the knight won't actually capture the buildings that he attacks, he just burns them to the ground. There are pros and cons to this. It's just another thing to consider in an already complicated scheme of combat. Man, that was long, but that's essentially what the basics of combat looks like in Populous. Once you understand it, it's definitely usable, but man, is it a ride to get there. Alright, well that about covers the aspects of commanding your people in the game, so let's move on to something a bit flashier, the in-game spells. Spells are a big player in the game. They can help you protect your people, they can make it easier for your people to settle, and they can weaken your opponent, especially when you need to buy more time. In my opinion, this is what people playing the game for the first time would get excited about because they sound awesome. I mean, listen to some of these spell names. Earthquake, Volcano, Armageddon. I know that I couldn't wait to try them out when I first put it in the cartridge. Initially though, after actually getting to the part in the game where I could use them, I can say I was a little disappointed. Maybe I expected too much from them, but maybe you'll see what I mean as we start discussing them. Okay, so I've already mentioned the topography spells, right? They're the biggest staple of all the spells, and you'll only struggle for mana to cast them in the earliest stages of a level. Raise land and lower land. They do pretty much what they sound like they're going to do. You can use them to make places easier for your people to settle, that kind of stuff. And then there's the place papal magnet or marker spell. We already covered that one, so there's not really a need to add anything to that one other than it's pretty much a staple spell as well. Now we start getting into the fun ones, with Earthquake up next. Earthquake shakes the ground and randomizes the terrain elevation, favoring a lower elevation than what was originally present. It's not great, but it's not bad either. It's sort of a poor Shaman's way of stalling a more powerful enemy to give them time to catch up. A few well-placed earthquakes can really disrupt your opponent's growth, but just 1 or 2 quakes on their own usually don't do very much. Alright, but what about Swamp? This spell is pretty nice, and it serves as your kill command. It creates a patch of deadly bog that instantly kills anything that walks into it. It's an incredibly frustrating spell to fight against, both for you and your opponent. Some of its most powerful and just dirty uses is putting it right on top of a marker when the leader and people are gathering around it, because it just kills everyone in the area. You can also do what I like to call night sniping, where you just dump a ton of swamp spells at the super strong night unit as it's making its way up to your land. If you get lucky, you can kill it before the enemy has time to clear out the swamp. The night spell turns your leader into a roaming enemy-seeking knight, whose strength depends on how many people were represented by the leader before his ascension into knighthood. Like most spells in Populous, its effectiveness is dependent on how you use it. Next is the Volcano spell, which is kinda misleading. Mountain spell would make more sense, but admittedly wouldn't be as cool. It essentially causes a mountain to spring up out of the ground, but there's no eruption or lava or falling debris. The most comparable thing it has to a volcano is that it populates the mountain with uninhabitable rocks that have to be cleared out with your topography spells before your walkers can settle in on the land. This spell is sorta like the upgraded version of Earthquake because the end result is the same, a disruption of growth, only the volcano's spell disruption is far greater. Don't get me wrong, the spell is powerful, and if you get spammed by it, it can be downright annoying, but still, a volcano this is not. The second to last spell is my favorite, and much to my disappointment, it is not one that the game gives you very often. Flood. Essentially, this lowers the elevation of all the land on the map by 1 unit, effectively causing the water to give the illusion of rising up 1 unit above the land. This definitely is the spell I had the most fun with, as with a bit of foresight in the form of making sure that all your people are building a good 4 or 5 units above the water, you can completely devastate your opponent with a few casts of this spell. Ah, the benefits of 40 days and 40 nights all wrapped up into a single button push, arc or not. The last spell is the mighty Armageddon, and probably the biggest disappointment. It's definitely a powerful spell, and I was always glad when I was able to use it, but, well, I mean, let me just ask you, what comes to your mind when you think Armageddon? I mean, do you think of fire raining from the sky? The sea is boiling? Zombies rising from their graves? Well, in Populous, it's basically the meet me at the flagpole after school spell. It's the spell you use when you're the big bully and you're stronger than your opponent, but you're too lazy to go fight each and every one of his walkers and knights. When used, the spell removes all the buildings from the map and places both the tribe's markers at the map's center, whereupon all the walkers from both tribes run to the center and fight to the death. As long as you have more people, and as long as your walkers don't have to travel stupidly through large patches of swamp to get to the center of the map, you'll be granted victory. But, like, that's it. No fire, no brimstone, just people walking into each other and dying. And that's all the spells. And look, I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, I'm happy that I had them in the game, but do you maybe see what I meant earlier about being a little disappointed? I mean, aside from the swamp and night spell, the other spells just sort of build off of the raising and lowering ground mechanic, or making walkers move to markers. When I first started playing the game, I focused on these two things that I just talked about. I really tried to learn the game's people mechanics, and I really tried to learn the game's spell mechanics. And while they definitely are a part of the game, I don't feel like they're quite what makes Populous Populous. I feel like the true shining feature of Populous is sort of unseen, or at least unnoticed. You see, buried underneath a confusing people management system and a somewhat lackluster spell system is what makes Populous unique. It's the battle against the environment itself. The environment is what stops Populous from being a game about head-to-head warfare, and more about clever uses of mountains and valleys, waters, and climate. I haven't really mentioned it yet, but every moment that a walker spends walking around, their yellow bars tick down to simulate a loss of population due to exposure to the elements. The rate of this decay can vary from map to map. On winter levels, walkers lose health very quickly, and on green pasture levels, they lose health very slowly. This means that depending on your environment, it may be a better strategy early on to try to not expand too quickly or too far away from your main establishment, since the population loss from exposure would make the venture not worth it. It also means that the gather then settle suggestion that you can give your walkers isn't as useless as it might initially seem, because sometimes it's better to have your walkers group up before they settle, because the environmental damage ticks down for each walker. So if you have 10 walkers with 10 HP, each of them is going to tick down 10 increments at a time. However, if you have 10 walkers with 10 HP that come together to create one walker with 100 HP, the HP of the walker will only tick down by 1 increment. This also means that on certain levels, the Earthquake spell becomes a bit more damaging, along with its counterpart Volcano, as it not only disrupts growth from buildings, but also hurts the current population by forcing walkers to walk around the environment. Similarly, each level has a population growth stat, which affects the rate at which populations grow inside houses, and subsequently the speed at which you gain mana to cast spells. Winter maps are the worst. They have really harsh terrain and really low population growths, and oftentimes end up being some of the longest maps for that reason. On another note, in most RTSs, maps often come down to choke points and ramps, which then lead to things like convex and concave movements of your army, but not in Populous. If you need a land bridge, you build it. If you want to delay your enemy from crossing a land bridge, you sink it. It's as simple as that. This and other aspects change the routine RTS mindset, in that, in Populous, it's almost always a better idea to fight your opponent indirectly. If a superior army is coming after you, you swamp it. If your enemy is focusing on population growth, you disrupt it. If you have a mountain in your path, you use it. This is one of the few games where you can truly say, when life gives you lemons, you find a creative use for volcanoes. It's kind of hard to explain, but that mindset, that diversion of strategy from the normal just, rah, I'm out to kill everything, is to me the heart of playing Populous. It's not flashy or exciting. I mean, rocks, mountains, snows, and swamps don't really sound that dynamic, but once you step past the 40-hour gameplay mark and start moving into the 60, 70, and 80 mark, you really begin to understand and appreciate the subtle mechanics behind the game's curtain, and even better, you find all the sorts of ways to use them to your advantage. But alright, here's your diploma. That's basically everything you'll get when you play Populous. I mean, there's definitely skill that comes into play from just game familiarity and such like that, but other than that, I mean, there's no real story or progression as you play, so you have to be able to appreciate the game's core mechanics in order to find any sort of enjoyment when you play. I mean, I guess there's a bit of progression that I can get into, but it's muted at best. So I wasn't kidding when I talked about reaching into the 80+ hour mark in my gameplay. It's a little embarrassing, but I have over 60 hours of gameplay footage here, and I did not come close to recording every single level I played. There really are 989 levels in this game, and there's only a vague semblance of uniform increased difficulty as you play. The levels and the rules are so random that 1 hour you'll be stuck on just one level, and the next hour you'll blow through 10 levels without trying. Don't think that you have to play each and every level though, as odd as that sounds. The game gives you a grade after each level in the form of score, although to this day I still have no idea based on what criteria. I do know that the higher your score, the more levels you'll skip, up to a maximum of 8 levels at a time. I sort of mentioned it earlier, but even though the game is the same thing over and over again, it really does its best to stretch out the content that it has by adding variations in what you are and aren't allowed to use on the map. The most common was to limit spell access, but the other factors included starting population, enemy reaction speed, difficulty, whether or not water was fatal or just dealt damage over time, where, how, and if you even could raise and lower land, and whether or not swamps went away after a walker stepped on them. If you actually do play through all the levels, you're pretty much guaranteed to become a master of the game though. I had played through some pretty difficult levels here and there on my journey to the big 989, but most memorable for me was the first time I faced a level where I only had access to the raise and lower land spell and the marker spell, and my opponent had near access to everything and started out with about 400% more population than I did. After trying a few times and spectacularly failing, I turned off the game and just stared at a wall, going over the statistics again and again in my head. It's impossible, I thought. You just can't do this! I felt like I was trying to fight a tank with a rock or something. It just felt so one-sided. But that's when I realized that you can actually win every single map in the game with just those two aforementioned spells. If you blitz your people over to the enemy side of the map using the Papal Magnet spell, and manage to settle one of your walkers over on his side, you can cast the Raise Earth spell, since you technically have a building in the area. At this point, you're basically using the lowest level spell in the game, Raise Earth, to continually raise the earth on your opponent's side of the map to create artificial volcanoes for a fraction of the cost of the actual volcano spell. It feels dirty and cheap, but so is having to fight an opponent with no spells. This was the last technique I discovered and mastered, but once I did, I never had any trouble with any of the maps in the game again. But okay, this rant has gone on long enough, so let's do a quick look at the game's negative attributes before I wrap it up. This game is a port. Is that inherently bad? No, but it's still just a port. And aside from the addition of the Three Little Pigs race and environment, nothing new was really added to the game. The game did do its best to convert its controls over to the SNES controller, including hotkey button combinations for almost every action in the game, so that's pretty good. But you're still trying to play a game with a controller that was meant for a mouse and keyboard. Early on in a level, the game runs smooth and fast, but as the map fills up, it slows down to a creaking, grinding halt, which only increases the already enormous time investment required to play. Every time the enemy kills one of your units, you lose mana. Now, I understand that this was a mechanics choice by the game designers, but I feel it is a horrible choice. The best way to stop an enemy from killing you is by using mana. Therefore, oftentimes you'll find yourself in an even match, or sometimes even when you're a little bit ahead, but a surprise attack from your opponent cripples your mana pool, removing your ability to defend yourself. You just have to sit there and watch him kill your units and then just restart. I really feel like this isn't a good mechanic because it simply favors binary early aggression and it offers very little counterplay for the recipient of the attack. 989 levels is impressive, but it's just too much. I sort of felt like I was done around level 400. At level 600, I really had to force myself to play, and at 800, I pretty much felt like I'd been eating at a buffet for 4 hours, and the restaurant manager was a psycho who wouldn't let me leave until I'd put in yet another hours of food into my system somehow. Actually, that's a crazy metaphor. I couldn't even eat for 40 minutes, let alone 4 hours. Anyway, not being able to directly control your units does distinguish Populous from other RTSs, but sometimes it's just too frustrating. Early on, when a single walker settling in a good location is actually pretty important, it can be really annoying when they just wander around and die. Sometimes that can even mean you just need to restart the level. Another negative trait is that sometimes you've won a level after 30 minutes, but it takes you another 30 minutes to hunt down every last enemy because you aren't allowed to use the Armageddon spell. There's not really a reward for beating the game, although the bragging rights are kinda nice. The game gives you a score at the end, which I think is the cumulative score you've had since turning on the game, but since the game doesn't have a save function, the score really doesn't mean anything. I mean, in order to get the highest score, you just have to play all 989 levels without turning the game off. It doesn't really feel like it has any meaning. But that's pretty much it for the complaints. My final conclusion for Populous for the SNES is that for what it is, it's good, and definitely good for its time. Although, is it a good game? No, not exactly. I mean, sometimes I had fun. Other times I was just frustrated or bored though. It was about 50-50. Was it terrible? No, definitely not. There was enough structure and playability to allow me to keep going until the end. Oddly enough though, aside from the flood spell, I think my favorite part of the game was just flattening and lowering the land so that it was all nice and smooth. That's probably why the volcano spell miffed me off so much each time the enemy cast it. But hey, if you like population-based strategy games, maybe you'll like this. Or maybe if you played it the day it came out, you might have nostalgic memories of it. Otherwise, if you watch this review, I'd say you're probably not missing much if you choose to skip this one. I guess if anything, it gave me a perspective of what it must have been like for God to command the Israelites in the desert. Only he must have been playing the game on nightmare mode because at least my walkers tried to listen to me. Oh well, this has been Chezni at SNES Legacy expressing to you that he has no more desire to play God now than when he started playing Populous. Signing off.
Well done, great, eternal, immortal God.